Robert Gunn, United States Army, July the 24th, 1946 to December the 27th, 1947. How do I remember the day? Well, I knew that because I left with draftees, and I had some friends that were subject to the draft and then redrafted. And back then, most of the draftees, right after the end of World War II, they didn't spend a whole lot of time. Some of them 7 months, some of them 8 months, some of them 9 months, but very few a year. I watched that pretty close because, to be honest with you, although when you have a job, you have to do what you're told or you can quit. But in the Army, back then, if they told you to take a rock that was here and put it over here, you didn't ask why. You just did it. I had been watching when I first had to sign. When you were 18, you had to go to the draft board and register. And they had control of you from there on. I lived in Metro, Louisiana at that time. And I registered. They tried to draft me and couldn't. That's the reason I got classified 4F. Got operated on, reclassified. And when I found out you could get in for 18 months, I said I would rather put 18 months in and know I'm finished with them. And that's what I did. You know, a lot of people love it. And I think it's good. I think really they should have the draft today. We're about as unprepared as a country can be. And they're just now finding it out. They give you these little things you hang on your neck, so if you die, they stick this little metal in your teeth. They even got the groove for your teeth to grab them. And those numbers of mine were 18, 299, 599. They've been with me ever since. I had no desire for any of that. As Captain was, he was one of the finest men I ever met. And of course, I used to drive him wherever he wanted to go on the base, you know. We had another fella that had been bumped out of the airborne, Lieutenant Joyce, and he came, was assigned to our company, and he was just the opposite, you know. He thought he was the Lord handed down. Yeah, I recall one night he came up and took my Jeep, didn't ask, didn't have any, and so I just called the MPs and had him picked up. And he used to ask me all the time, he said, when are you going on a hike with us? I said, when you quit bringing in sick people? And I said, I just want to just be honest with you. If you bring many more in, you're going to have to go before somebody, because I was getting too many on sick call. Mm-hmm. And a company clerk back then, if the first sergeant wasn't there, he ran the company. Even though you had staff sergeants and tech sergeants assigned to the company, that didn't count when it came to the rules and regulations. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, actually when I left in November to come back to the States, I have never seen anyone nor heard from anyone that was in my company. And I never wrote to anyone in the company. They there wasn't a lot of close association back then, at least not in Company M. I was in the draft and got classified 4F, and then got operated on in New Orleans, and then got reclassified 1A. Then I decided I need to look around, so I wanted to see if the Navy had anything for me. But when we went down to see about it, I asked what the enlistment was. They said 4 years, and I said, no, thank you. So I left and went to the Army. Instead of getting drafted, they had an enlistment program that was 18 months. And I decided to enlist for 18 months because they have to turn you loose. Congress has nothing to do with it then. And I'm glad I did, because they had to turn me loose after my 18 months. And when the Korean War came along 6 years later, they couldn't draft me. I wasn't a fan of the service, and had good reason not to be. We didn't have anything but the regular boots to wear when we got over to Korea in 1946. We didn't have really any place to sleep except Japanese barracks. There were no paved roads there. None that I recall, and none in the country, as a matter of fact. And we landed in Incheon and went in on barges, no docks. And when we got to Incheon, they placed us in Japanese, I guess, I don't know if they were Japanese barracks or old rice mills, but they were huge buildings with doors about this high. And we stayed there for 2 weeks, and then we were sent down to Daegu. And in Daegu, we lived in Japanese barracks with doors about this high until, let's see, I think I got there in November. Couldn't take a bath. Had to bathe out of a helmet for a little over 2 months, 20 below zero weather. Nothing but the Army overcoat to keep you warm. And they just weren't prepared. Now, shortly after that, engineers came in and they built Camp Skipworth. You familiar with that?
No.
It was there. I had been and still was assigned to Company M, the 1st Infantry. But we had an awful lot of people that lost their mind or played like they lost their mind. Shipped a lot of them back to the States. And we changed first sergeants there. And my company commander was Captain Wancio. And I don't know who the original first sergeant was, but the one we got in was named Sergeant Kavanaugh. And he had been bumped down from a captain. And he was really a wonderful fellow. And he came up to me one night up in the barracks and asked me if I typed. And I said I attempt to. So when he got finished with the conversation, he asked me to report to the orderly room in the morning. And the fellow who had been the company clerk was a young fellow named Hart. I don't recall his first name, but he got shipped off to Japan for a week or two stay. And I don't know what they did with a mail clerk, but after there I was there 1 week in that job, and he asked me if I would be interested in taking that job, and I said yes. So then I went from a private to a corporal. That's as high as you can go in that job. Mm-hmm. And our captain through the months asked me if I wouldn't go back in the field so he could make me a buck sergeant, and I said, no, thank you. I just told him, I said, and also had a Jeep assigned to me and drove him places. So from whenever that was, maybe at the end of May of '46 until we left in November, I was the company clerk, the mail clerk, and I guess you'd say the captain's driver. and I was happy to be there.
I'm sure you were.
Yeah, the Army is just like a city. All kinds of people. Just like civilian life, and you pick who you wish to associate with. And I think in the 13 months that I spent over there, may have been a year, it's just 12 or 13 months, I saw 2 American women, and the rest of them were what we called then gooks. That's what they were called. They'd been under the Japanese rule for 40 years, I believe. But they didn't tell us a lot. When I was at Frisco waiting to go over, they didn't tell you where you were going. You just had to find out. And the Army then is far different than it is today. When I was in Virginia for our basic training, it's tough. It's what they need to go back to. I mean, we were down, and I say we, if you were assigned KP, you got on your hands and knees and scrubbed the floor. And the weather was 100 and something degrees in July. Mm-hmm. No curtains on the windows. Other than that, I was glad to come home and tell them goodbye.
Imagine.
Now, I've got relatives that were officers. I say relatives. Mama's cousin, General Miley, that's right, married Geraldine Sudduth here in Starkville. I was supposed to go see him in Tokyo, and I told Mother that I had no interest in going to Tokyo, that I was going to forego my stay where I was, and leave when I could, as soon as I could. And that's what I did. I really can't answer that. I don't know. I do know that those people did not like us. The Japanese didn't like us. And to be very truthful, I doubt if they like us today. It's a case I have to.
Right.
It's a case I have to. So I couldn't answer that. Korea used to be called Chosen. And why they changed, I don't know. They tell me today that Seoul is one of the most modern cities that there is. But they sure have come a long way with our help. Well, I went to church all the time, unless something actually kept me from it. But I do not recall a church. There may have been, I just don't recall it from my time over there. But when I went, there was a large building on the other side of the drill field that we used, where the Red Cross was. And as best I recall, chairs were set up for us with a chaplain. Now, I never recall a chaplain coming to our barracks, nor do I, after Camp Skipworth was built, I lived in the orderly room right there. I didn't live in the rest of the armed artificer, the supply sergeant, the first sergeant, and myself. There were 4 of us that had a room right in back of the orderly room. And we lived there, and then in back of us was a supply room where the supply are issued the guns. And I don't ever recall a chaplain coming in the supply room. I think he stayed over there. No, I recall seeing him. But I do remember, because I sent all our programs home to my mother. I was still single then, like just barely out of school. But I recall attending the services. I just can't recall whether, I just don't think we had a church. I know we didn't when they first put it up. But I do know, when you asked me what was the purpose in the U.S. being there, we stopped at several places going over, and on the way over, we went through a typhoon to pick up a fellow from another church. I don't know, another boat. I don't know whether it was a merchant marine or whether it was a soldier, but the fellow needed an operation, and they had to do it at sea. And so they had to head, the typhoon was there, and they had to head to it. And it was terrible because of the water. When you pulled guard on the ship, you had to be tied to the, I guess you could call them little hallways through with the rails. And I remember I had to pull guard one night on it, and they'd tie you to them so the water gushes through.
Wash you away.
Yeah, it would take you away. And the rudders on those ships, they end up like this, and it shakes the whole thing as it tries to get through there. It's kind of scary. Of course, you don't think when you're 90-something like you do when you're 18 either. Nothing worries you. Young people don't worry about things like that. lot of difference as time goes on.